He didn't know his wife's name, but he was wearing her ring, right there on his left hand, gold band, slightly worn at the edges. And on the inside, engraved in small block letters, a set of initials and a date that meant absolutely nothing to him. He sat in a hospital waiting room in Reno, Nevada at midnight, staring at that ring, turning it, trying to feel something. Nothing. He knew he was cold. He knew his head hurt. He knew the fluorescent lights above him were too bright. He knew, with a certainty he couldn't explain, that his name was Jack. It wasn't. His name was Ryan Vance. He was 34 years old. He had a wife in Colorado Springs named Sarah. He had 2 children, a son named Nathan, who was 8, and a daughter named Zoe, who was 6. He had a house on Galley Road with wide sidewalks out front and a porch light his wife always left on when he was driving home late. He knew none of that. Black ice on I-80 had taken it all. One slide, one impact, one concussion that did something specific and catastrophic to the part of his brain that stored who he was. And here is what makes this story unlike almost anything you have ever heard. Ryan Vance did not disappear into darkness. He built a life, a full, real, loving life, with a different name, a different wife, a son he watched come into the world, while his first family, 3 states away, held a memorial service over an empty grave. For 17 years. And the ring he wore on his finger every single day of those 17 years, through his second wedding, through his son's birth, through every ordinary Tuesday, was engraved with a promise he had made to the woman who thought he was dead. This is the story of the man who wore 2 rings. To understand what happened, you have to know who Ryan Vance was when he still knew who Ryan Vance was. He grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, played college baseball, tore his rotator cuff junior year, switched to business, graduated, got a job in regional sales for a medical equipment company. He was the kind of man people described with the same words every time: steady, reliable, present. He met Sarah Coleman at a friend's barbecue in the summer of 2001. She was laughing at something the host said. He walked across the yard specifically to find out what was so funny. They married on June 14, 2003. The ring was engraved that day, S and R, June 14, 2003. By November 2006, they had 2 children. Nathan was 8, Zoe was 6. They had a house on Galley Road in Colorado Springs. Ryan traveled for work. He was home most weekends. Sarah managed HR for a healthcare company. They were, by every observable measure, fine. Better than fine. The conference in Sacramento had gone well. He called Sarah from the road. "I'm going to drive straight through. I want to be home when the kids wake up." She said, "I'll leave the light on." She always left the porch light on when he was driving home late. Outside Reno, a late-season storm had laid a thin sheet of ice across I-80. Not enough to see clearly in the headlights, just enough to matter. At 11:41 p.m., Ryan's car drifted, overcorrected, and hit the center divider at speed. The airbag deployed. His head went forward, then back. A moderate concussion and a focal injury to the hippocampus, the brain's memory center. Not a visible wound, not a dramatic injury. Just enough disruption to the wiring to cut every connection between Ryan Vance and his own past. A trucker named Dennis pulled over within minutes. Ryan was standing on the gravel shoulder, staring at the car like it belonged to someone else. "Dennis, hey, you okay? Need me to call someone?" Ryan looked at him, blinked slowly. I'm not sure who you'd call." Dennis called 911. An ambulance arrived. Ryan was taken to Renown Regional Medical Center in Reno. His wallet was in the car. His phone was in the car. The car itself, a 2005 Ford Explorer registered to Ryan Thomas Vance, 4421 Galley Road, Colorado Springs, was left on the shoulder of I-80. Nobody connected the car to the man in the hospital. Not that night. Ryan arrived at the ER with no identification. The intake nurse asked his name. He said, "Jack. I think my name is Jack." He couldn't explain why. It just felt right. The way a word feels right when you've been dreaming in a language you don't speak. They treated him for a concussion and a laceration above his left eye. They ran a cognitive evaluation. He could read, reason, do basic math. He had language and personality and humor. He just had no past. Medically, the condition is called dissociative amnesia, specifically a fugue variant. The brain, overwhelmed by traumatic injury, draws a curtain across autobiographical memory. In most cases, it lifts within days or weeks. In Ryan Vance's case, it did not. At 2:17 a.m. on November 15th, Sarah Coleman called Ryan's phone for the 7th time. It rang. It went to voicemail. At 3 a.m., she called Colorado State Police. By 6 a.m., officers had located the Ford Explorer on the shoulder of I-80 near the Nevada state line. Airbag deployed. Driver's window cracked. A small amount of blood on the headrest. No driver, no phone, no wallet, no body. Sarah took that call at 6:43 a.m. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Zoe had crawled into her lap an hour earlier, sensing something, and fallen back asleep. Sarah kept one hand on Zoe's back the entire time, kept her breathing even. She asked, "Is he alive?" The officer said, "We don't know yet, ma'am. We're searching." For 11 days, they searched. They combed the terrain around I-80 from the crash site to the nearest town. They checked drainage channels. They contacted hospitals in 3 counties. Renown Regional had admitted a John Doe on November 14th. But by the time searchers checked hospital records, that John Doe had already been discharged. He had a name now. Jack Reynolds. The name he'd chosen for himself because he needed something to put on the social worker's intake form, and Jack was all he had. The connection was never made. Ryan Vance was declared missing on December 2nd, 2006. Sarah never stopped looking. 3 years, a private investigator, $41,000. Flyers, a Denver news segment in 2008, a DNA submission to every national database that would take it. Nothing. In 2010, her therapist and her mother urged her, gently, persistently, toward a declaration of presumed death. The court granted it on March 19th, 2010. Ryan Vance was, legally, dead. Nathan was 11. Zoe was 9. Sarah held a memorial. She bought a headstone. No body beneath it. Just a name and 2 dates and 4 words she chose herself. He always came home. Because that had been true. Until it wasn't. That's what Sarah believed. He always came home. But Ryan Vance didn't come home. He came alive instead, 3 states away, with a different name, a borrowed jacket, and a ring he couldn't explain on a finger he couldn't remember. And the life he built in the absence of everything he forgot was about to become the most complicated thing any man has ever had to walk back into. Jack Reynolds left Renown Regional Medical Center on November 22, 2006. with a borrowed jacket, $40 from a church emergency fund, and a social worker's phone number he never called. He walked to the nearest truck stop on I-80. He ordered coffee. He sat in a booth for 4 hours, staring at a laminated menu, trying to remember anything. Nothing. Not darkness, not fog. Just nothing. The same way you don't feel the absence of a color you've never seen. What he did have was skill. His hands knew things. He could wire a light switch without thinking. He could calculate a tip in his head. He knew how engines worked. He knew how to talk to people, the rhythm of it, when to push, when to wait. Procedural memory lives separately from identity in the brain. Ryan's skills survived the accident, even when Ryan did not. He got a construction job in Reno within 4 days. Cash work. No one asked many questions. Within a year, he had a room at a boarding house, a paycheck, and a social security number obtained through a state assistance program for people with no verifiable history, a process that existed in 2007 with far fewer safeguards than today. Jack Reynolds became a real person, on paper, slowly. And then he drifted. Reno to Boise, Boise to Portland, Portland to Eugene. He worked construction at every stop, residential builds, commercial frames, road work when the weather allowed. He was the kind of worker foremen asked back each season, quiet, competent, no drama. In Boise, the winter of 2008, he worked a job site where the crew ate lunch together every day in a half-finished kitchen. One of the older guys, a man named Gus, late 50s, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a table saw years back, noticed Jack staring at his ring one afternoon. Gus said, "Trouble at home?" Jack said, "I don't have a home." Gus looked at him for a moment, not with pity, just taking it in. Then he said, "Ring says you do. You just can't find it yet." The lunch break ended. Neither of them said anything else about it. But Jack thought about that sentence for years. Ring says you do. You just can't find it yet. It was the closest anyone ever came, before the algorithm, to telling him the truth. In Portland, in 2008, he rented a room above a laundromat. At night, he could hear the machines running below, a low, rhythmic hum he found strangely comforting. He lay in the dark and tried to remember things, not frantically, almost academically, running his hand along a wall looking for a door he wasn't sure existed. He thought about the ring constantly. He thought about S and R and the date, and whether there was a woman somewhere wearing a matching ring and wondering where he was. He thought about that woman more than he thought about anything else. He just didn't know her name. Here is what you need to know about the ring. Jack Reynolds never removed it. Not once. Not in 3 years of drifting across 3 states. Gold band. Simple. Worn smooth at the pressure points where a ring gets worn with time. Inside, S and R, April 14th, 2003. He didn't know what the date meant. He didn't know what the initials stood for. He wore it because it felt physically, viscerally wrong to take it off. Not romantic, not sentimental. Just a bone-deep certainty that the ring belonged on his finger, and removing it would be a betrayal of something he couldn't name. When he arrived in Eugene in 2009, a woman at the job site asked him about it. "Are you married?" Jack said, "I honestly don't know." She laughed. She thought he was being evasive. He wasn't. In 2009, Jack Reynolds was working a residential build in Eugene, Oregon. Claire Baker was the project coordinator for the construction company. Organized, direct, funny in a dry way that snuck up on you. She had a rule. She didn't date anyone from work. She broke it once, for Jack Reynolds. She told her sister, "He was the most honest, confused person I'd ever met. He didn't pretend to have it together. He was just completely transparent about not knowing who he was. I'd never met anyone like that." Jack told Claire about the accident on their third date. All of it. The name he'd chosen, the ring he couldn't explain, the years of waking up and not knowing where the first chapter of his life had gone. He held out his hand, showed her the engraving. S and R, the 14th of June, 2003. Claire looked at it for a long time. "So you might have been married." "That's what I think." "And you still wear it?" "I can't take it off. It's not that I'm holding on to something. I just feel like I owe it to whoever she was, to not pretend she didn't exist." Claire was quiet. Then she said, "Okay." Just that. They married in June 2011. Claire wore a simple white dress. Jack wore the ring, the old ring, the engraved one, because Claire told him to. "If it means something, keep it. I'm not threatened by a woman you don't remember." Their son, Marcus, was born on March 4th, 2013. Jack held that baby in the delivery room and felt something he had no language for. Not a memory, not a recognition, something newer, a love that needed no past to exist. Marcus arrived and the world arranged itself around him, and that was simply, completely true. Jack came home from the hospital that night, made Claire toast and tea, put Marcus in the bassinet by the window, and sat at the kitchen table at 4 a.m. looking at the ring. S and R, April 14th, 2003. "Whoever you are," he thought, "I hope you know I didn't mean to leave." Gus's words came back to him in that quiet kitchen. "Ring says you do. You just can't find it yet." He was still looking. In 2014, Claire found something while organizing the garage. It was tucked into the lining of the jacket Jack had been wearing since Reno, the borrowed jacket from the church fund that he'd just kept because he had nothing else. 7 years he'd worn that jacket. 7 years with this thing folded into the lining the entire time. It was a photograph, small, bent at one corner, faded from years in a dark pocket. A woman and 2 children, a backyard. The woman laughing, head thrown back, fully present in that moment. The children, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 6, running through a sprinkler. Blue sky, wooden fence, someone's ordinary, happy summer afternoon. On the back, in faded pencil, Galley Road, August 2006. Claire brought it to Jack that evening. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at it. Then he said, very quietly, "I don't know them." But his hands were shaking. They tried to investigate. They searched the address, found it was a street in Colorado Springs. They searched missing persons databases under Jack Reynolds. Nothing, because Ryan Vance was the missing person, and those names didn't connect anywhere in any system. They hired a researcher for 2 weeks. He found nothing. Jack put the photograph in the top drawer of his bedside table. He looked at it sometimes, late at night, house quiet, Marcus asleep, Claire's breathing gone slow and even beside him. A woman laughing, 2 children in a sprinkler, blue sky. Someone's life, possibly his. probably his. He lay in the dark and thought about what it would mean if that woman was still out there, still carrying a grief he was walking around alive and not knowing about. That thought was the one he couldn't put down. That was the thought that kept him searching. Here's what you need to understand about the next 9 years. Jack Reynolds never stopped trying to find out who he was. He submitted his DNA to 3 genealogy databases. He registered with NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. He consulted 3 neurologists about recovered memory. He did all of this quietly, without drama. He didn't talk about it much, because there was nothing new to report. He was looking. He just wasn't finding. And here is what made the photograph so unbearable to carry over all those years. Not what it showed, what it implied. If that woman was his first wife, then somewhere in America there was a woman who had lost her husband and didn't know he was alive. There were 2 children who had grown up without a father. There was a headstone somewhere with his name on it, and a porch light that someone had finally, eventually, turned off. Jack Reynolds lay awake thinking about that porch light for years. He didn't know it was still on. Sarah Coleman did not crumble. That is the most important thing about the next 17 years. She grieved, deeply, completely, without shortcuts. She sat in her car in the school parking lot in December 2006 and cried until she couldn't see. She stood in Ryan's closet in February 2007 and pressed his shirts to her face and screamed into them so the kids wouldn't hear. But she did not crumble. She kept the house on Galley Road. She went back to work. She put Nathan and Zoe in therapy. She went herself. She told the children the truth, age appropriately, over time. Dad had an accident. We don't know what happened. Dad loved you. Dad loved us. Nathan was 8 when Ryan disappeared. He remembered his father clearly. The baseball games, the specific way Ryan made pancakes, always too thick. The sound of his laugh. Zoe was 6. Her memories were softer, more feeling than image. The weight of being carried, a deep voice. She told her therapist at age 14, "I don't remember his face. I remember how safe I felt. And I can't feel that way anymore, and I don't know how to get it back." In 2012, Sarah met a man named David Grant, a high school principal, patient, steady, perceptive. He understood from their second conversation that the shape of Ryan Vance would always be present in this family. He didn't try to fill it. He built around it. They married in 2014. Nathan was 16. He walked Sarah down the aisle and cried during the vows. Not from sadness exactly, from understanding that his mother had earned this. Zoe, always Zoe Vance, she had never wavered on that, didn't come to the wedding. She was 14. She stayed at her grandmother's. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. In 2019, a genealogy platform called Family Origins rolled out a new feature: automatic cross-referencing with the NamUs database. Jack Reynolds had submitted his DNA to Family Origins in 2016. Vague results, no close matches, and he'd moved on. On October 2nd, 2019, Family Origins sent him an email. Subject line: "A possible family connection has been identified." Jack sat at the kitchen table with his morning coffee and opened it. The system had found a partial DNA match, not a parent or sibling, a second-degree relative. The matching profile: Nathan Vance, age 21, Colorado. Jack read that twice, then again. Nathan Vance, Colorado. He went to the profile. Sparse. A photo. One entry on the family tree. Father, Ryan Thomas Vance, missing since November 2006. Jack put his coffee down. He stood up. He sat down. He stood up again and walked to the window and stood there with his hand on the frame, looking out at the street without seeing it. He went back to the table, looked at Nathan Vance's photo for a very long time. And then, for the first time in 13 years, he remembered something. Not an image, not a face, just a feeling. A boy running through a sprinkler. The sound of a specific high laugh. His own voice saying something. Sun on the back of his neck. His. Jack Reynolds put his face in his hands and sat very still. Then he walked to the bedroom door and said, "Claire, I need you to come look at something." She came. She read the email. She looked at Nathan's photo for a long moment. She said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I need to call them." She said, "I know." He looked at her. "Ryan," she said, using the name for the first time, and he flinched because it fit. Terrifyingly and undeniably, it fit. "I'm not going to be the reason you don't make that call. Whatever we figure out after, we'll figure it out. Make the call." What Jack Reynolds did not know, sitting at that kitchen table in Eugene, was the full weight of what Ryan Vance's disappearance had meant to the people carrying it. Sarah Coleman had spent 3 years and $41,000 looking for her husband. Nathan Vance had, at age 14, printed his father's missing person flyer and taped it to his bedroom wall. He left it there for 4 years. He only took it down when he left for college, because he didn't want to leave it in an empty room. Zoe Vance, at age 18, had started a social media page dedicated to cold case missing persons in Colorado. She told a journalist, "It's the only way I found to do something useful with the thing I couldn't fix." 40,000 followers by 2019. Nathan had submitted his own DNA to Family Origins in 2018. Not to find his father. He was engaged. He wanted his medical history before he and his fiancée started a family. He wanted to know what genes he was carrying. And the algorithm matched him to a man named Jack Reynolds, who had submitted his DNA 2 years earlier and was still waiting. Both of them had been looking. Neither knew they were looking for each other. 13 years of searching had found nothing. The algorithm found it in an overnight automated scan. Jack Reynolds had a name. He had a trail. He had a son. But knowing you're Ryan Vance and actually being Ryan Vance are two completely different things. Because Ryan Vance had a wife and 2 grown children who had buried him. And Jack Reynolds had a wife who just told him to make the call, and a 6-year-old son asleep in the next room who only knew one version of his father. And the gap between making that call and everything that came after, that is the part of this story with no clean answer. Ryan called Nathan Vance on October 14th, 2019. Nathan picked up on the second ring. Ryan said, "Nathan, my name is Jack Reynolds. I believe I may be your father. Please don't hang up. Let me explain before you do anything." Silence on the line. Then Nathan said, "I'm going to need you to say that again." Ryan said it again. All of it. The accident, the hospital, the name he'd chosen, the ring, the photograph in the jacket, the DNA match. Nathan was quiet through most of it. When Ryan finished, Nathan said, "I need to verify this before I can do anything with it." Ryan said, "Good, please verify. I want you to verify. I need you to know this is real as much as you do." Nathan called Sarah that night. She listened to every word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then, "Nathan, people do terrible things." Nathan said, "Mom, he asked me to verify. He wants fingerprints run. He gave me his address." Long silence. Then Sarah said, in the voice Nathan knew as her trying not to fall apart voice, "What did he sound like?" Nathan thought about it. "Like Dad," he said. "He sounds exactly like Dad." Sarah got off the phone and didn't call back for 12 hours. Colorado State Police coordinated with Oregon authorities. Ryan Vance had been fingerprinted in 2003 for a Colorado contractor's license. Jack Reynolds' prints, submitted voluntarily, matched perfectly. 13 years, 5 months, and 29 days after Ryan Vance walked away from a crash site with no memory, he was officially alive. Nathan called him the night the results came through. He said, "It's you." Ryan said, "Yeah." Nathan said, "Okay." A pause, then, "Dad." Ryan had to set the phone down. He pressed his hand flat on the kitchen counter and just breathed for a moment. When he came back, he said, "I'm sorry, Nathan. I'm so sorry for all of it." Nathan said, "I know. I believe you. I need some time, but I believe you." He said, "Mom wants to call you." Ryan said, "Whenever she's ready." Nathan said, "It might be a while." Ryan said, "I'll wait as long as she needs." Sarah Coleman called Ryan Vance on October 17, 2019, 12 days after the DNA match was confirmed. 12 days because that's how long it took her to be able to speak without screaming. She told Nathan, "I can't call him until I can do it without screaming." When she finally called, she was in her car in the driveway. David was inside the house. She'd asked him to stay inside. She said, "Ryan." He said, "Sarah." She said, "You're alive." He said, "I am. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I couldn't." She said, "You've been alive for 13 years." He said, "Yes." She said, "I had a headstone made." He said, "I know. Nathan told me." She said, "He always came home. That's what it says. Because that was true. You always came home. Until you didn't." Ryan had no answer. There is no answer for that. Sarah said, "You have a son." He said, "Marcus. He's 6. And a wife." "Claire, yes." Sarah was quiet. Then she said the thing that Ryan Vance has repeated in every private conversation since. "I'm glad she had you. Because you were clearly, somewhere, being someone worth having. And I'm glad you weren't alone all that time." And then, without a pause, without softening it, "But I need you to hear something before we go any further. I buried you, Ryan. I watched my children bury their father. What happened to Nathan and Zoe? You cannot put that back. No reunion fixes that. I need you to know that before you come here." He said, "I know." She said, "Okay, then tell me what happened. From the beginning." He did. 4 hours, all of it. Sarah said she was glad he hadn't been alone. That is a level of grace most people will never be tested on. And Ryan Vance flew to Colorado Springs 2 weeks later to stand in front of the people that grace had cost. Ryan Vance flew to Colorado Springs on November 3, 2019. Sarah met him at the airport, alone. She'd asked Nathan and Zoe to wait at the house. She stood at the arrivals exit with her hands folded in front of her. 50 years old, silver in her hair, a blue coat Ryan had never seen because she'd bought it in a life he wasn't there for. Ryan walked through the doors. He saw her. He said later that he didn't remember her face, not in any explicit, retrievable way. His brain had no stored image to match against. But he remembered the specific shape of her, the tilt of her head, the way she held herself absolutely still when she was holding something in. His body remembered even when his brain had not. He stopped 4 feet from her. She looked at him. Then she looked at his hand. The ring. The same ring. Worn smooth at the pressure points, the engraving still legible inside the band. S and R. June 14th, 2003. Sarah and Ryan. June 14th, 2003. Their wedding date. She had chosen those words 13 years ago, standing in a jewelry shop, thinking only of the man she was about to marry. He had worn that ring through 13 years of a life she knew nothing about, through another wedding, through the birth of a child, through thousands of ordinary mornings. And here it was, still on his finger, still carrying her initial, still carrying the date she had walked down an aisle toward him. Sarah looked at the ring for a long time. Then she looked at his face, and she said, not as an accusation, not as a question, just as a fact she needed to say out loud because it was the only true thing in the room. You kept it. Ryan said, I couldn't take it off. She stepped forward. She put her arms around him. And Ryan Vance, the man who had worn a dead woman's ring for 13 years, not knowing it was hers, held on to his first wife in an airport arrivals hall, and neither of them said a single word for a very long time. The people around them moved past, luggage wheels on tile, announcements overhead. Neither of them moved. Nathan Vance met his father that afternoon at Sarah's house on Galley Road. He was standing in the living room when Ryan walked in. 21 years old, 6'1". He had Ryan's jaw and Sarah's eyes, and a stillness about him that had not been there when he was 8. He looked at his father for a long moment. He didn't move toward him. He didn't speak. Ryan said, Nathan. Nathan said nothing. His jaw tightened. He looked at the floor. Then he looked back up. Then he said, I don't know what to do with you. Not angry. Something more complicated than angry. Angry would have been easier. He said, I practiced this, what I was going to say. I had a whole thing. And now you're standing there and you look like my dad and I don't have the words for what this is. Ryan said, You don't have to have words. Nathan said, I do though. Because if I don't say it now, I won't say it. So, he stopped, breathed. You missed everything. My first baseball game, my first car, graduation, the night I got into college, Mom's wedding. I walked her down the aisle. Did she tell you that? I did that, not you. A pause. My engagement. I'm getting married in March. You're going to meet my fiancée for the first time at my wedding. You haven't met her yet, and you're going to meet her at my wedding. Ryan said, I know. Nathan said, I'm not finished. Ryan went still. There were nights, a lot of nights, when I was 12, 13, when I needed a dad and I didn't have one. And I managed. I figured it out. David came along and he was good. He is good. But I figured out how to not need you. And now you're here and I'm supposed to What? Undo that? Start over? I'm 21. You can't give me back those years. Ryan said, I know I can't. So what are you actually here for? The question hung in the room. Ryan thought about it honestly before he answered. He said, I'm here because you deserve to know that I didn't leave. I'm here because you deserve a father who shows up, even if it's 13 years late and I can't explain it. And I'm here because I'm your dad. That didn't stop being true just because I forgot. Nathan looked at him for a long time. Then he sat down. He put his elbows on his knees. He looked at the floor. The worst part, he said, quieter now, is that I can't even be angry at you. You didn't leave. You forgot. And I can't be angry at a person for forgetting. A long pause. But it still cost the same. Whether it was your fault or not, it cost the same. Ryan said, I know. Tell me what it cost. I want to hear all of it. And Nathan did. For 2 hours, he told his father everything Ryan had missed. Not as punishment, as a record, as proof that the years had existed and mattered and hurt. Ryan listened to every word without flinching. When Nathan finished, they sat in silence for a while. Then Nathan said, so quietly Ryan almost missed it, I'm glad you're not dead. Ryan said, me too. Nathan said, that's the best I can do right now. Ryan said, it's enough. Zoe Vance came the next day, 23 years old. She had her mother's posture and her father's stillness when she was thinking. She walked into the living room, looked at Ryan, sat down in the armchair across from him. I don't remember your voice, she said. Ryan said, that's okay. It's not okay. Her voice was level, but her hands were tight in her lap. I was 6. I should remember my dad's voice. I've spent 17 years trying to, and I couldn't. And now I'm sitting here listening to it, and it doesn't land anywhere. Because I don't have anything for it to land on. There's no memory for it to match. You're a stranger who looks like the photographs. Ryan said, I know. Don't say I know. You don't know what it's like to be the child in this. He stopped, absorbed that. Zoe said, I built a whole life around your absence. I started a whole project. 40,000 people follow a page I made because I was 17 and I didn't know what else to do with missing you. And now you're here, and I don't know what to do with the page. And I don't know what to do with you. And I don't know what to do with the fact that I feel... She stopped. Ryan waited. She said, I feel cheated. I know that's not fair. I know the accident was real. I'm not saying it's your fault, but I feel cheated out of something I can't get back. And you being alive doesn't fix that. You being alive it's good. It's obviously good. But it's also one more thing I don't know how to hold. Ryan said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Zoe stood up and left the room. 20 minutes later, she came back. She sat back down in the same chair. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. They sat across from each other in complete silence for an hour. It was the most honest thing either of them had ever done. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. She just walked out. Ryan sat alone in that living room for a long time after the door closed. Sarah stayed with David Grant. She said it plainly and without apology. David has been present for every day of the last 8 years. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't count because the first ending turned out to be false. Ryan moved to Denver, 30 minutes from Colorado Springs, close enough to Nathan and Zoe, far enough to not be a presence in Sarah and David's home. Claire and Marcus remained in Eugene. Ryan drove up twice a month. He was there for every school event Marcus wanted him at. Marcus called him Dad on the phone, always Dad, and Ryan answered every time like it was the first time he'd heard it. He stood in the front row at Nathan's wedding in March 2020, beside Sarah and David. Nathan had asked him to read a passage during the ceremony. He did, barely keeping his voice level the entire way through. He and Zoe talked on the phone every week. She called him Ryan, not Dad. He didn't push it. She sent him a card on Father's Day 2021. Inside it said only, "Working on it." He keeps it on his fridge. The legal situation resolved with less drama than you might expect. Oregon courts found that both Ryan and Claire had entered the marriage in complete good faith, granted a dissolution that protected Marcus and Claire fully. Ryan and Sarah filed a mutual separation agreement, a formal recognition that Ryan's life had forked in 2006 and could not be unforked. Marcus was 6 years old when his father sat on the floor, at his level, and tried to explain what had happened in words a 6-year-old could hold. Ryan said, "Buddy, you know how I told you I got hurt a long time ago and forgot some things?" Marcus said, "Yeah, you forgot your name." "That's right. And it turns out I had another family before you, a different family. And I forgot them too because of the accident. And now I found them again." Marcus thought about this. Then, "Do you love them?" Ryan said, "Yes." "More than us?" "No, not more. Just also. The same way." Marcus processed that. Then, "Are you going to go live there?" "No. I'm going to visit sometimes, but I'm always going to come home." Marcus nodded, then asked if they could have cereal for dinner. They had cereal for dinner. The following week, Marcus brought home a drawing from school. A family, stick figures in crayon, the way 6-year-olds draw families. He'd labeled them carefully. Mom, Dad, Marcus. And then, off to the side, connected to Dad by a long crayon line. More family. Claire photographed it and sent it to Ryan. Ryan showed it to Nathan on his next visit to Colorado Springs. Nathan looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "That's actually pretty much right." Ryan Vance still wears a ring. Not the original, that one he gave back to Sarah in Colorado Springs on the second day of his visit. He placed it in her palm without saying anything. She looked at it. Then she closed her fingers around it and didn't say anything either. She told her sister afterward, "It was the right thing, not because I wanted it back, but because he knew, without my saying, that it needed to come back. That's who he was. That's who he still is." The ring Ryan wears now is simple gold, no engraving. He bought it himself in Denver the week he moved there. He's been asked why he wears a ring at all now. He's not legally married, not currently. He said, "Because I spent 13 years wearing a ring that reminded me I had made a promise to someone, even when I didn't know what the promise was or who I'd made it to. And I kept it anyway, blind, without knowing whose name was inside it." The ring isn't about marriage anymore. It's about not forgetting that the promises exist, even when you can't read them. Gus had been right. The door was there. It just took 13 years to find it. There is no villain in this story. There is no one to be angry at. And that is, in many ways, the hardest kind of story to sit with. Because when there's no villain, all you're left with is the damage. The damage was real. Nathan grew up without his father. Zoe can't remember his voice. Sarah built a whole life around the space where a man used to be, and that life was real and good and earned. And none of that changes because the man came back. And Ryan Vance lost 13 years of his own life, not to someone who stole them, to ice on a highway, to the fragility of the thing inside our skulls that we trust completely and understand barely at all. Here is the question this story leaves. Ryan Vance loves Sarah. He knows that now, clearly and completely. He also loves Claire. That love didn't come from memory or history. It came from who he was when he had neither. And it is no less real. We like to believe that the self is singular, that there is one real life and everything else is a detour. Ryan Vance's story suggests something more unsettling. What if you can build two completely real lives? What if love doesn't divide? It just multiplies. What if the promises you make are kept even when you can't remember making them? Ryan Vance once said, "People keep asking me which life is real. Both are real. Both families are mine. The only thing I'm still not sure about is whether I deserved either of them." Zoe Vance never answered that question. She just, on the last day of that visit, on the way out of the room, without turning around, put her hand on his shoulder for a brief moment. Brief enough that you could argue it was accidental. It wasn't accidental. Maybe that's the only answer this story has. Ryan wore a promise he couldn't read for 13 years. He wore it through a life built from nothing, through a marriage entered in good faith, through thousands of ordinary mornings that should have been someone else's. And the whole time, the answer was right there on his finger, waiting for him to find his way back to it. Someone out there is doing the same thing right now. There are 4,000 unidentified persons in the NamUs database today. Some of them walked away from accidents. Some of them are living under names they chose because they had to choose something. Some of them have families on the other side of the country who haven't turned the porch light off. If you have a missing family member, submit DNA to NamUs. It's free. It's the tool that found Ryan Vance when 13 years of searching couldn't. If you know someone who appeared without a past, who carries an unexplained object, who goes quiet when someone asks about their history, ask about it. Gently. Once. Share this video because someone watching it might recognize that story. Not Ryan's, someone else's. The one that's still unresolved. This has been The Man Who Wore Two Rings.